This week on Democratica.
I do disagree with the IG.
As he has offered zero evidence.
We can't expect these people to be decent. We can't expect these people to be honorable. And as long as they're in office, we can't expect to trust them whether he's impeached or not.
Hey, Mitch, do you plan to take up this impeachment and to run kind of a fair process? And right now what the Republican Party is telling you is check your common sense at the door. All that and more coming up. From the 8th circle of hell in Mitch McConnell's backyard, you're listening to Democratica, the political podcast for anyone who wants to understand the news without losing the ability to sleep at night. You're AJ Johnson.
And you are Stuart Max.
I'm a 13-year Capitol Hill veteran, a political insider, and the founder of the OD Action newsletter and network.
And I am a writer, optimistic nihilist, and definitely a dilettante when it comes to the news of any kind.
Well, I think Chairman Nadler said it worst when he said this.
Today is a solemn and sad day. For the third time in a little over a century and a half, the House Judiciary Committee has voted articles of impeachment against the president for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The House will act expeditiously. Thank you.
Today is not a sad day. With all due respect to Chairman Nadler, the day that we elected a criminal was a sad day. Every day that criminal abused his office, abused the American public to commit new crimes was a sad day.
Well, yeah, but you can see how someone can make the argument that having to go this far to a person that we've elected president.
We have had to go this far for years now. Now, I'm not saying that an impeachment will end in a conviction and being removed from office, but this is a good thing. We are moving in the right direction. And I understand why Chairman Adler says that it's a sad day. I understand why Pelosi talks about this as being solemn. It is a solemn act, but this is a good thing.
It's amazing how you are bound and determined to be glass half full on this.
I'm not glass half full. No, I'm not. This is...
You are. You're positive. You're beaming.
No. I want to be clear. I'm not glass half full. I am glass full. This is the right direction. There is no doubt that this is something that needs to happen. There are 2 articles of impeachment. They have been approved. And this week, the full House will vote on those 2 articles.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Go on.
Just 2? I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot for what this president must have done.
This is the 4th time in U.S. history articles of impeachment have been approved and sent to the House floor. Bill Clinton was ultimately charged 2 articles of impeachment. Richard Nixon would have been charged with 3. That's how many passed the Judiciary Committee. Andrew Johnson was charged with 11. Should those be the roadmap? None of them ended in conviction, although Nixon's might have. The reason that you do this is because you want to build the tightest case possible. And this is just like with prosecutors, right? You don't necessarily charge somebody with their worst offense. You charge them with the one that you can prove. For example, Al Capone killed dozens of people, probably ordered the killings of hundreds of others, and he was charged with and convicted of tax evasion, right? So you do that because you want to get a conviction. And unlike in a criminal court of law, with impeachment, either you're impeached and convicted or you're not. The penalty is not dependent on the nature of the crime. Now, there was a lot of debate in the House because the president has been so lawless for so long. Since day one, a lot of Republicans make a big deal. Well, you've been wanting to impeach the president since day one. Well, that's when he started breaking laws as president, was on day one. Certainly there's the emoluments clause, there's Russia collusion, there's obstruction of justice during Mueller's investigation. And what they settled on was, even if Ukraine is not the worst of his offenses, we have this faux transcript, we have confessions from him, from his chief of staff, we have mountains of evidence. It is an open and shut case, so they are charging him with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the investigation. We've said this before, there's only one jury in the country that wouldn't convict him in a matter of minutes, and that happens to be the United States Senate. But that's essentially the reason these charges have been brought. Not because they're the worst, but but because they are the tightest possible case. Here's where we are right now. The House Judiciary Committee has approved articles of impeachment that will go to the House floor on probably Wednesday. On Wednesday, the House will vote yes or no on each charge, sending it to the Senate, where the Senate will decide whether to acquit or convict the president of these charges, which is expected to be relatively quick. Now, the question becomes, what kind of a trial can the president actually get in this Mitch McConnell-controlled Republican Senate? For answer to that, I figure since we're in his backyard, why not just ask Mitch himself? Hey, Mitch, do you plan to take up this impeachment and to run kind of a fair process in the Senate where you would be somewhat of an objective juror?
We have no choice but to take it up, but we'll be working through this process, hopefully in a fairly short period of time, in total coordination with the White House counsel's office and the people who are representing the president in the well of the Senate.
So you're not even going to pretend publicly to keep an open mind about this?
Everything I do during this, I'm coordinating with White House counsel. There will be no difference between the president's position and our position.
Obviously, we expect Mitch McConnell to have the president's back, but for him to come out and say, not only have I made up my mind about this, but to say we're going to be coordinating with the president's legal team at every step is really just a brazen abdication of his obligations to this country.
I'm just not surprised. It just seems that this is how partisan we've become. I don't really think the Republican Party is interested in the answer to whether or not he's guilty at all. It seems like they know he must be guilty.
You make a really good point there, actually, that we know that Republicans are on the side of the president. Most Democrats are on the side of impeachment. What Mitch McConnell again has done, just like he did with Merrick Garland, is to say, I'm not even going to respect the institutions that I serve. I'm going to trash the norms and make very clear that I swear an allegiance to the Republican Party, not the Constitution, not the United States of America. And right now, Donald Trump is the head of my party. And so whatever it takes, there's no respect for the institutions that are the very foundation of this country. Something else very big happened last week. It intersects with really what we were talking about Mitch McConnell, how he is throwing the institutions overboard, really the bedrock of our democracy.
This is going to be the investigation into the investigation, correct?
Yeah, so indeed, well said. So the Inspector General for the Justice Department, Michael Horowitz, released his report investigating the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, the source of many conspiracy theories from the right, that, you know, it's that kind of thing where whenever people point out these illicit ties and these illicit actions by the president, by his people, connections with Russia, it's always about, well, the investigation was started illegally, which is really not a defense but a distraction. Inspector General Horowitz concluded that, quote, FBI had an authorized purpose when it opened Crossfire Hurricane, that's the name of the investigation into the connections between the Trump campaign and Russia, to obtain information about or protect against a national security threat or federal crime. And it found, quote, no evidence that political bias or improper motivation, end quote, was at play. There it is. And Republicans have apologized for spreading these conspiracy theories after it is discovered that they were completely baseless.
Liar, liar.
That did not happen.
Did not.
The Inspector General's report also found, quote, significant inaccuracies and omissions, end quote, in FISA warrants on Carter Page. FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Carter Page was one of the Trump aides who had connections to Russia, who was surveilled by the FBI. Basically, it is possible if the FBI agents had played things by the book, if they had presented the right case to the FISA courts when asking for warrants into Carter Page, that they would not have gotten the warrants. It's possible. We don't know. They also had pretty good evidence, but not as good as they put forward. The problem is, with Republicans' case, is very, very little of the investigation was based on Carter Page. So what we do know, according to the report, is that Crossfire Hurricane was not based on Carter Page. While Republicans will insist that Carter Page and the infamous Steele dossier were the sole reasons that an investigation of the Trump campaign were begun, the truth is the investigation into the Trump campaign's ties with Russia began because George Papadopoulos, who was one of just 5 foreign policy advisors to the Trump campaign in early 2016, he got drunk and told an Australian diplomat that George Papadopoulos himself was coordinating with Russian officials who had stolen thousands of of Hillary Clinton's emails for them to use in the campaign. I'm going to repeat that because I think it's worth noting. The investigation was begun because a campaign staffer got drunk and confessed the whole thing to an Australian diplomat.
I don't know if I want to believe it. It doesn't. It's like wag the dog. Only word.
You don't want to believe it? You should consider switching your party to Republican. Part of what's at play is that we're dealing with the criminal B team.
It is. It's not even, this isn't even the varsity.
Yeah, these guys are not good at crime, but it's not going to keep them from trying.
I see very little in the way of consequences for a lot of these people.
No, for a lot of these people, sure, but a lot of them have been convicted. Aside from where the investigation started, it has turned up convictions of George Papadopoulos, Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign manager, who made tens of millions of dollars working with pro-Putin Ukrainian oligarchs, and former corrupt Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych. To be clear, he's former president. He's still corrupt. So Paul Manafort was convicted of using shell companies and foreign bank accounts to evade taxes on the money that he made. Roger Stone, Trump aide, was convicted of obstructing investigations into the campaign's coordination with Russia. Michael Flynn, who was the first national security advisor, was also convicted of lying to investigators about this investigation. Rick Gates was convicted. Michael Cohen was convicted, all of covering up things with regard to these very investigations. And yet, all Republicans want to talk about was how the investigation was started. And again, how the investigation was started is tremendously important. And if we want to talk about fixing the problems at the FBI, that's something we can do. That's something we should do. That's something that we need to do. Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, Donald Trump's hand-picked FBI director who replaced James Comey, Donald Trump's hand-fired director, has said we need to address these problems. I stand by this report. But the person who's not standing by this report is William Barr, who had this to say.
I do disagree with the IG, and that was whether there was sufficient predication to open a full-blown counterintelligence investigation, specifically using the techniques that they did to collect intelligence about the Trump campaign.
Do you know what evidence he's basing that on?
My guess is his good judgment and years of expertise in the field.
That's as good an answer as I can think of because he has offered zero evidence. The Attorney General has stood up and said, I disagree with the findings of my Inspector General.
For no good reason.
Without offering any evidence. He has started his own competing investigation with, again, his own department's Inspector General. The real danger here is, again, like what Mitch McConnell is doing. Mitch McConnell is not out there saying, we believe the president did nothing wrong. He's saying, quite candidly, we are going to use the Senate, which is constitutionally obligated to provide a check on the president, as a wing of the president's campaign. William Barr is doing the same, saying the FBI mishandled this investigation. The report into that mishandling was also wrong. And we stand by all of the things that they found were failures, and everything that they say that goes against the president, the guy who gave me my job, is wrong. This is an incredibly dangerous abuse of the Justice Department.
Are we at all surprised at this choice that they keep making? The time has to come where we can't expect these people to be decent. We can't expect these people to be honorable. And as long as they're in office, we can't expect to trust them whether he's impeached or not. If they're going to refuse to see it, and we have to accept their refusal.
Both William Barr and John Durham came in fairly respected. William Barr was George H.W. Bush's last Attorney General. George H.W. Bush was not as polarizing a figure as his predecessor and his Republican successors. And what's happened is William Barr has turned out to be somebody who has surprised a lot of people in his willingness to throw out everything that his department once stood for to stand by this president. As near as we can tell, William Barr is somebody who has long believed in what's called the unitary executive. Dick Cheney was a big champion of this. The unitary executive is basically the idea that the president should have near dictatorial powers without Congress butting in.
That's really terrifying.
In addition to why has William Barr been so willing to disgrace his reputation for this president, there's this idea, why did he come back? He served in this role 25 years ago. He had nothing left to prove. And it seems more and more like William Barr saw an opportunity to come into this role at a time where Congress was going to assert its obligation, really, to hold the president accountable, which is something that to people like William Barr, to Dick Cheney, is deeply offensive. And so this was his opportunity to come in and set a precedent that Congress needs to butt out of federal affairs. He's really transforming, at least at the top echelon, the Justice Department into kind of an Orwellian ministry of justice, where he's taking for granted people aren't going to read these reports. The first time that Barr really made people's jaws drop was when he got the copy of the Mueller report before it was made public. He just went out in front of the cameras and sold it as something that it wasn't, which was an exoneration of the president. And he completely fabricated elements of it, omitted lots of it, and put in Mueller's mouth the idea that he had exonerated the president. The way that he's handled this Inspector General's report, the only precedent for it is in his own shocking actions. They are banking on the idea that a majority of the country will fall into one of two camps: blind loyalty to the president, or does not have the time to process things beyond what we're telling them. If you're on a jury, you will always be told, don't check your common sense at the door. And right now what the Republican Party is telling you is check your common sense at the door. It's just a coincidence that Donald Trump said, I need you to do us a favor and investigate my political rival while withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. There's nothing to see here when the Inspector General says there was no political bias in the opening of this investigation. It's just a coincidence that Donald Trump stood up and said this:
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Just before those emails were released by WikiLeaks, at a time when Donald Trump Jr. and members of the campaign were talking to WikiLeaks. It's just a coincidence. The Republican Party, if there's an honest bone left, their slogan for 2020 should be, check your common sense at the door. This week, the House is voting on impeachment of President Donald Trump. And we need to be ready. These things don't just happen. Democrats in the House are getting cold feet, some of them. In the Senate, we've got a long road to get to a conviction. So we all need to get to the phones and our computers, and we need to contact both of our senators. We need to contact a representative and let them know we favor impeachment and removal of Donald Trump. So I need you to call 202-224-3121. The congressional switchboard operator is there to connect you to your 3 members of Congress, 2 senators, and a representative. Once you've made those 3 calls, go to impeach.org and register for a Nobody is Above the Law event. On the eve of impeachment, all around the country, in hundreds of communities nationwide, we will be gathering to show support for impeachment of our lawless president. So that's impeach.org. Sign up with your zip code, find your events, and if there's not one near you, you can start one. Moment of uplift. Moment of uplift. So I've been avoiding going back to Greta Thunberg.
You should.
I could do it every week.
Yeah, just yes.
But this week,
Yes.
she was named Time Person of the Year.
Wait. Give her the full title. She was the youngest person in 92 years ever to be named Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
For calling attention to the global climate crisis and bringing action and bringing public support, and she's obviously got a long way to go. Predictably, she was attacked on Twitter by Trumps. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted, Time leaves out the Hong Kong protesters for fighting for their lives and freedoms to push a teen being used as a marketing gimmick. How dare you? Yeah.
And they've been giving them so much attention in this administration. We've heard Donald Trump Jr. speak out so often on this. So I'm grateful that he brings that to our attention, and I'm being entirely facetious right
sarcasm.
now. I know.
At least Donald Trump Jr. pretended like he was attacking Time and not a teenager. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, tweeted this. So ridiculous. Greta must work on her anger management problem. Then go to a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. Chill, Greta. Chill.
Ew.
Yeah, that's the president of the United States trolling a 16-year-old hero.
I can think of no better example whenever I hear someone using like vilifying terms, the patriarchy. I can't think of any better identifier than the tone, than the attitude of that message from that ridiculous human being.
It's awful in a lot of ways. And I think a good reminder, man, am I glad we're on the side that we're on. Greta's a hero. She is awesome. On the other side, this is the leader of the opposition. He's a bad person. I disagree on political issues with a lot of people who I respect. Donald Trump is not one of them. Mitch McConnell, I know you're listening, not one of them. To sink to this level is truly pathetic. Greta, hero that she is, changed her Twitter profile to read, a teenager working on her anger management problem, currently chilling and watching a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. I also think it's worth noting that we are 1 week, if that, removed from party-wide furor over a witness at an impeachment hearing saying, I'm not going to say his name, but the name of the youngest child of the president. Just saying the kid's name was enough to incite the wrath of the Trump family and most of the Republican Party. This is the president of the United States actually trolling a teenager again on Twitter. And again, I feel very good about the side that I'm on. And I continue to be inspired by Greta Thunberg's example and young people around the world. We all need to be upping our game and not just marveling at how great they are. We need to honor their work and their example by doing better ourselves.
That was a good moment of uplift. A nice little call to action to boot. Thank you, Stuart.
I'm just working with what I'm given. Hey, AJ.
What's up, Stuart?
Keep fighting the good fight.
You too, buddy.
Democratica is produced by Sam Graber and engineered by Mark Charles, with support from Fifi Sun, recorded at the Ramshackler Room with music from Mike Michael. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Democratica on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever podcast app you like to use. You don't want to miss an episode, and we'd miss you if you did. So please subscribe, and while you're there, leave us a 5-star review.